Okay, here we go. Let's begin. Okay, everybody, welcome. And we're going to be talking about some heavy things tonight. And I'll be honest, this was a very heavy thing for me to have the willingness to talk about. It was not easy for me. I had very strong feelings about this topic. And of course, this is something that's been going on for the last few weeks. So this is not something that happened yesterday. It's something that maybe started a few weeks ago, and it's been on our minds. And then yesterday, because of what happened, we all have a lot of very strong feelings, and we're feeling it very raw inside. And I'll be honest, today I cried about this whole story. I was crying. I could not sleep well last night. I had some thought rumination. I had some trauma. I actually I parked today in French Hill in Jerusalem. If you live in Yerushalayim, I parked on Rehov Sheshes Hayamim, and I don't know who the Rav is, but there's apparently a Rav there near where I parked. And anyway, so I parked my car there, and I saw a woman with a baby carriage going in to speak to this Rav. And when you see a woman pushing a baby carriage going in to speak to a Rav, if you aren't traumatized, you probably don't think too much about it. But if you have trauma, so all of a sudden you start thinking very strangely. And so without me thinking twice about it, I started thinking, maybe she's being coerced by the Rav to do all sorts of things together, and she's here against her will. And that's a crazy way to think. But to be honest, that's what I was thinking. And to me, that's a sign of trauma that I had from this story. And I have nothing for or against Chaim Walder, and we're going to try to speak L'Shem Shamayim. And that's why I wrote these big words on the screen, L'Shem Shamayim. We're trying to be marbek v'od Shamayim. We're trying to come to the truth and to grow and to make a safer community. We're going to try to bring divrei Torah and daas Torah to understand exactly how to approach this in the most balanced, healthy way that we can. And I'll be honest, this is a really, really, really hard topic to talk about. There's so much complexity. There's so many parts to it. And I think what we're going to do first is exactly the name of the talk. That's what we're going to do, is we're first going to try to notice what we're feeling. And we're going to be open about that, honest about that, and we can share about that. And then we're going to try to understand how to relate without those feelings. We're going to try to put them to the side after we validate them and we recognize them. We're going to try to use our minds to understand what happened and what does it mean? How do we approach this? What do we do about this? What does it mean about us? What does it mean about what happened, and what can we derive from it? What can we work on? There's so many parts to this. I mean, since 1 p.m. yesterday, when Chaim Walder took his life, I was trying to think about what to talk about, and I don't always struggle with that. And here it was so hard. And then I spoke to a bunch of Rabbanim. Everything that I'm saying today, I spoke over with a number of Rabbanim, and we're going to mention some words from a gadol that I spoke to later on. But I had a loss of words. I didn't have the right words. I didn't know what to focus on and how to capture all the different parts. And there's so many people involved, because there's children that read the books, and there's Chaim Walder himself, and then there's his family, and there's the victims, and there's so many different things going on here. We're going to stick with me. I see in the chat the question. Stick with me, and we're going to divulge everything as we go along. But just to put things out there, we're going to try to be as genuine as we can. I'll be honest with you, because if we're not honest, then we're not going to get anywhere. I feel like pressured, intimidated, because our feelings are so strong on this topic that it takes courage to stand up publicly and talk about this, and to try to set our feelings aside and to see what there actually is, and to look at it without bias. It's so hard, and I'm admitting that right now. And I hope I'm not biased. Of course, I'm going to have some bias. I'm going to try as best as I can to move it aside. I know that a lot of people are expecting me to say certain things, and other people are expecting me to say the opposite. And if you made it this far and you came to the Zoom, I really appreciate your trust and your willingness to hear what we have to share. I hope it's l'to'eves. I hope that it's marba kvod shamayim. I hope it makes our communities safer. I hope it's balanced and healthy. Feel free to disagree with me, but I'm going to be as genuine as I can. And when I was told to say things that are maybe hard to hear, I'm going to say them as well. There's going to be no holds barred. We're going to say things exactly as I understand they're meant to be. And I think that that's going to be best because, when we work within reality, we're going to be much more able to get close to truth and to tikkun olam and to accomplishing what we need to tonight. So without any further ado, let's jump in. So my name is Rabbi Avi Tenenbaum, or Avi Tenenbaum. Some of you may know me, and I do a lot of crisis management and disaster work. I write articles. I have the link to this website here. I'm happy to send these links out later on. I hope to record this. I hope this is recording now, and we're going to send the recording out right when it's ready. Hopefully by Thursday morning, it should be ready. We're going to try to shrink it down to size, send it out. And in case you don't get it in the groups you're in or however you found this link, please just send an email to avitenenbaumpfa@gmail.com, and we will give you the recording. If you found it, the to'elas, please share it. Excellent. Okay. So what are we feeling? How to relate? What can we learn and grow from together? So, is it even possible to gain clarity on such complex issues in 1 hour? And who has such clarity? Who can claim the bold claim that they're so wise and they're so smart and experienced that they have such perfect understanding that they're not going to miss a single facet of this complex story? So I'm not making that claim, but I am going to do my best, and I think we should try. So what are we feeling right now? That's the question, right? So feel free to write in the chat box, anybody that wants to share, if you feel comfortable. What are you feeling right now? What does this make you feel? Because, if we don't first notice what's going on inside of us and see what that's teaching us, then we can't even possibly proceed. So I'll share some of the things that I was feeling. I was feeling confusion, trauma, sad, excellent, scared, shock, horror. I see people really sharing here. And there's no wrong answer. Anger, guilt, disbelief, happy, amazing. I love these answers. Sense of not being able to trust, okay, disappointed. There's no wrong answer, and feelings can't be justified. And that's such an important thing for people to know, because we sometimes guilt ourselves for feeling this way or that. Disappointed. We feel what we feel, and we have to recognize that, and we have to be aware of that, and be understanding and compassionate of that about ourselves. And if we don't start there, disgusted, if we don't start with honesty and self-awareness about where we're at, then how could we possibly even proceed from there? Chilul Hashem, for sure. Chilul Hashem, mortified. Right, so we've got some raw emotions. I had some thought ruminations. People are hurting. Somebody said that it's maddening to them. If you could hear this and you're not muted, please make sure to mute your recording. Restlessness. Okay, so the list goes on. And again, like we said, there's no wrong answer to what we're feeling. And we don't have to feel good or bad that we're feeling happy or feeling numb or feeling sad, feeling angry. These are all the right answers. And it's a complex situation. And so it brings with it many, many feelings. And as we're going to get to soon in this presentation, it can all be true all at once. We can even feel happy and sad together. I mean, betrayed. Sure. Every disaster that I've ever worked with, and I worked with a lot of disasters over the last few years, unfortunately, every single one has its own characteristics. And a search of a missing child, a loss of respect for leaders. I'm paying attention to the chat, and I appreciate what everyone's writing. If there's a missing child for several days, that brings with it certain characteristics. Or the Surfside tragedy, that brought with it certain characteristics, certain problems, certain feelings. Or the Meron tragedy, the Karlin tragedy, when there are terror attacks in Israel. Each event, each tragic event and trauma event brings with it its unique tchunot, its unique characteristics. And so here we have a person who, as we're going to hear from the Gadol later that we're going to quote, was really part of an authority figure that we trust. Interesting. I like what the person's saying. We're going to respect every single thing that people are writing in the chat. The way that people showed up to this event, how did they react? We're going to talk about that a lot. Some people feel that he wasn't given a chance, 100%. Some people feel that the way people reacted killed him, caused him to kill himself. I mean, the list goes on and on for how people are thinking, how people are feeling. It's a person that a lot of people looked up to and let into their homes and got advice from. And it's a person that did some terrible things. And by the way, if I'm saying these things and you're saying, well, Avi, how do you know? So just stay tuned. Yes, there's sadness for his family. There's sadness for the victims, and there's sadness for the victims that they may never get to see justice. I mean, there's so many parts, and I'm not claiming in this talk to address all of them. It's just too large. It's too big for me. I'm a very small person, but we're going to try. So let's continue. So we have these feelings, and they're so strong. They are so strong. And, there was a time that I was speechless. There was a time that I had so many thoughts going on at once. And then I was pulled into those thoughts and confused because they're all contradicting one another. And then eventually I started to see there's some complexity here. Maybe there's some dialectical thinking. Maybe it's all true at once. Maybe it doesn't have to contradict. And I tried to understand how to relate to current events, to the events that we're dealing with now. And I tried to make my own understanding of it. And by the way, I'm not looking to talk about Chaim Walder and to, go out of my way to vilify him or anything like this. That's not what we're talking about. What we're trying to do is to learn from what happened, to see what's constructive, what we can learn about this story, about ourselves, about society, about how we reacted, and how to make our community safer. So again, I'm not looking to go out of my way to say Yetzer Hara, but whatever we do say, please afford me the trust and respect that I did try to speak to a lot of Rabbanim about this today and formulate some sort of a opinion that we felt together was worth sharing. So, we can emotionally react in the name of truth because we're hearing very strong, painful, raw things, and we have a knee-jerk reaction to that, and we can't deny that. And we're filled with feelings. I mean, I'm filled with feelings right now. They're running through my veins, and they're so strong, and I'm not going to deny it. And they always teach about bias, that if you think you're not biased, you're lying to yourself, because of course we're biased. We have negios. The Sifrei Mussar are filled with this idea. Psychology is filled with this idea. We're filled with negios. We're filled with bias. But at the very least, we can recognize that we have bias. We can recognize that we're approaching a topic filled with raw emotion, filled with this anger and this sadness and this disappointment and this judgment and all that stuff. Before we even begin to have a dialogue, we're bringing into the room all these feelings. And if we can't notice that and admit that, then it's going to be that much harder to have a intelligent dialogue that's worth repeating over to other people and using to make the world a better place. So we're going to recognize that now. So we have strong feelings. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of people involved in this story in parts. And we might need what therapists call dialectical thinking. If you ever heard about DBT therapy, the D stands for dialectical. Dialectical means you can sometimes have two seemingly contradictory ideas that are actually the same at the same time. And this idea is found also in the Sifrei Mussar as well. So, for example, I don't know if everyone here knows me, but I wear many hats. But one of the hats that I wear is I try to help the Israeli police. And there's a lot of reasons why I joined the Israeli police a number of years ago. And I remember the first time I ever arrested a person. And that's an interesting experience to have, to arrest somebody. Okay, so we caught a thief breaking into a store on Rehov Paran. If you live in Yerushalayim and you ever were on Rehov Paran, it was 3 a.m. Thursday night. And we caught a thief breaking into a store, breaking a window and trying to get into, break into the register and take the money. And we caught him red-handed. And the chief, the senior officer that was with me said, Avi, please put handcuffs on him and neg cuffs on him and lead him to the police car. And that was my job. You're given an order, and that's what you have to do. And I put handcuffs on this person. And my knee-jerk reaction in that time was, Oy, I feel so bad. Rachmanis. I should have mercy. Here I am. I'm humiliating this person. I'm putting handcuffs on this person. I'm putting him in a police car. There's a cage in the back of the police car. You're basically putting him in a cage. Then he's going to go to jail, which is a bigger cage. You're ruining his life. And all those feelings came up because, you know why? We're human beings. We're human beings. We're Jews. We're human beings. We have feelings. And if I don't think clearly and recognize those feelings and the place of those feelings, and I knee-jerk react based on those feelings, I'll say, I feel so bad for this guy. Let me just let him go. But that would be incorrect as well, because the Torah tells us that there's something called mishpat. There's din. Yesh din v'yesh dayin, right? There's justice. And there's other people in the world too. And the Chazal say that if you are merciful to somebody who is harming others, then you're being cruel to the people that you love. So even though I felt mercy, and even though I felt, compassion and all sorts of feelings that came as a reaction to what I was doing to this person, but I had to set that aside and do my duty, which is to take care of society, make society a better place, put handcuffs on this person, and put him in the back of a police car. And yes, we're going to write a report about him, or we're going to bring him to the station, and you can call it, we're going to ruin his life, but you can also call it differently. We're helping society. We're protecting society. We're protecting you when you're sleeping. We're protecting your business. And maybe even we're helping this person as well. Maybe we can reform him. We can help him get on his feet and to engage in honest business and to be a productive person in society. So being a human being is no easy task. It's not simple. We have lots of feelings. And we can feel something, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we should do. And we're going to have to notice our feelings and put it to the side. And I know some of you might be like, how long is Avi going to drive on this? But I'm telling you guys, I feel it's so important to really face this and feel this and believe this before we proceed. So we're going to be discussing things that people have strong feelings about, and I already know that no matter what I say, somebody's going to be dissatisfied. And there's many opinions, and I have no claim that my opinion is better than anybody else's, but I am going to try to bring daas Torah later on. And by no means is the daas Torah that I'm going to bring soon going to replace other opinions as well. And a lot of the listeners who joined today sent me tons of opinions of different Rabbanim around the world, and you really see there's a big machlokas about this stuff. I mean, there's an enormous machlokas, and the Chazal say, Kmo she'en partzufehen shavos, kach ein deosehem shavos. Just like people's faces are not the same, so too their opinions aren't the same. And even in matters of halacha, things are different. If you look in the introduction to the Tanya there says that in halacha we have very divergent opinions, and he says in the area of philosophy and mussar and hashkafa, al achas kama v'kama, we have even more opinions. So there you go. And I'm just going to bring up some ideas for now. And I'm not trying to answer them this second, but I am going to raise some ideas. So, people sometimes struggle with, if somebody does something bad, well, maybe they weren't bad. Maybe it was pathology. Maybe they were mentally ill. Maybe they were crazy. And maybe there is an idea like that in the world, right? You see in the Torah too. Sometimes you have a person who is a shoite, right? And a shoite is patur from mitzvahs. And so we have an idea in theory that some people are incapable of making good judgment and things are not their fault and there's just nothing you can do about it. That concept exists. Does it apply here? And if you say that and you say it all the time, then there's no more room for evil in the world. And we clearly know that there's evil because if there's no ability to choose between right and wrong, so then nobody can ever be bad. We're all just in therapy for our issues and we never made any bad decisions and no one's a bad person. And we should just let everybody off the hook with tremendous compassion. And that's also not true. So there is evil in the world and there is mental illness in the world. And then we know the idea of tshuva. And we know the idea that some people can be redeemed. They make mistakes, but the Torah says you can redeem yourself. You can fix that. And if you harmed other people, you can ask them forgiveness. And if you stole something, you can pay it back. Is the things that Chaim Walder did, does that make him redeemable or unredeemable? And this is something that we're going to quote the Gadol later talking about. But these are some of our questions. This is part of the complexity. And should we be happy that he died? And is he deserving of death? And is that the Torah's view of this? Instead of him sitting in jail, should he have been dead? And if you would see him sitting on a street corner, contemplating taking his life, would you encourage him to take his life? Or would you be shev al taisa adif? You would just abstain. Or no, you would cheer him on, egg him on, right? So that's a question. What would you do? And what about his family? And what about the victims? And if you side with the victims, does that mean we shouldn't have any compassion for him? Or if we have to talk about him in a certain way and say that he did certain things, is that not fair to his family? And this is all part of the complexity, right? And should we sacrifice him to protect the community? Should he be the scapegoat? And did he have free will? And did we cause him to kill himself, like some people claim? So these are all questions. And I hope to answer some of the questions. I'm not trying to answer all of them. And I think that as human beings, we have to be humble and honest. We're not big enough to always know all the answers to all the questions, but I still hope that it will be us what we're going to say from here on in the talk. Here's another thing I was thinking, and I have to apologize. My presentation isn't too fancy. I didn't even put my logo in. I was just so busy discussing things and just trying to really understand that I didn't have time to make a pretty presentation. You could say you didn't have a fair din Torah. There's very strong opinions on this from mikotze ela kotze. Mikotze ela kotze. And again, I'm not claiming to give an absolute truth or opinion, but I am going to claim to try to give a somewhat balanced opinion that I think a lot of people can appreciate, as we're going to see soon. What are we looking at on the screen right now? Sometimes people whose child was murdered, for the sake of example, they forgave the killer. So I simply put into Google, parents forgive murderer. I hit enter, and this came up. So should we forgive him? If the parents of some murdered child forgave a murderer, should we forgive him? Right? These are questions. I'm not giving the answer yet, but these are questions. And then there's a difference maybe between a person who makes a mistake, and you know what? We make mistakes. I sure make mistakes. I make a lot of mistakes. And is there a difference between being human and making mistakes versus stubbornly denying a mistake and then making even more mistakes and refusing to receive help or influence, right? We make mistakes. I guess we can let a mistake slide here and there. Are we all perfect with our children? Are we all perfect in Yetzer Hara and in the way we talk or treat other people? Maybe we have family feuds. Maybe we're disrespecting our parents. Maybe we damaged some part of the world, or we had dishonest business practices, or maybe we did adultery, or we did all sorts of sins that the Torah talks about, and we made mistakes, and people make mistakes. And the Torah talks a lot about people who make mistakes, and what if it's b'shogeg, what if it's b'mezid, and how to do tshuva. And the mussar talk about this. But what if there's a different category? What if somebody makes a mistake, but he doesn't look to do tshuva? He doesn't want to do tshuva. He's stubborn. And he makes another mistake and another mistake and another mistake, and he just keeps going and going. Maybe there's a difference between those two people as well. Maybe we can forgive the first one, but we can't forgive the second one. And again, I'm raising these as questions. And then there's another question. A lot of people had such strong feelings about this. I was begged by people on both sides of the aisle before I gave this talk to either say that what people did killed him by the way that the tzibur reacted, or to say that we have this mitzvah to go and say what he did and how he did it and to vilify him as much as possible for the sake of the tzibur. And again, I'm raising that we have very strong feelings. And some people had strong feelings about the process of the Din Torah. Did he have a fair trial? And if he had a fair trial from the Beis Din, well, maybe he was given an unfair trial from society. And, already a month ago, people were writing posts, articles, podcasts, statements. Everyone was giving an opinion about what Chaim Walder did and didn't do, what we should do with him, shouldn't do with him, and how we should relate to him and to his books, and et cetera, et cetera. And at that point, technically on paper, he wasn't yet found guilty, not in a Beis Din and not in a court of law. So some people make the claim that by those people saying that Chaim Walder did whatever he did a month ago before that process, that legal process finished, we are disrespecting the system of law. We're disrespecting the system that the Torah has in place for deciding halacha, right? People, for example, in America were upset about the Capitol riots, and they feel, that if you go break into the Capitol, then it shows that you're disrespecting the whole system, right? There's no more system anymore. So maybe is that what happened here? Okay, I see in the question some people that are asking, right, who says that he even did what he did? Maybe because the process of the courts didn't finish, technically, because he took his life before. So maybe we don't really know, and we'll never know what he did. And some people say that as well. And then people will say, well, what about Lashon Hara? And by no means do I mean, in today's talk, to belittle the importance of Lashon Hara. And I encourage everybody to learn the halachas of Lashon Hara and the importance of it, to learn Sefer Chaim and Shveres HaLashon. And I have to learn it very much myself. I used to learn it. I have to learn it more. And b'li neder, I am going to continue to learn it. I actually put it on my table today. Not just to talk about it, but to do it. We have to be careful with Lashon Hara. There's another topic here. Is our life ours to take? And are all suicides equal? And the fact that somebody died by suicide, does that mean that it was our fault? And maybe they chose to do it, and maybe it was a tactic. And maybe this was out of free will, or maybe it wasn't. And maybe this was out of impaired judgment. And these are questions, too, that people are asking and struggling with. Right? And this is what we spoke about before, mishpat versus rachamim. The fact that we have rachamim for somebody, does that mean that there's no mishpat? And this is a major struggle in today's society, in today's generation. We're giving tons of compassion to everybody. We're freely handing out compassion. And I teach self-compassion to clients. I believe in compassion. Anyone who just joined, please mute yourself. If you could please mute yourself. Thank you. What's the point of why we're talking about this? The point is, what are our goals? Good question in the comments. The goal for tonight, and I'm sorry for not being organized. It's just honestly, it's because it's a difficult topic. Our goal for tonight is to grow as people and to know the Ratzon Hashem in this situation and to protect our children and our society. And that is a very worthy goal. And that's what we're going to try to do today. Okay, did we have a part in this? And maybe there were red flags along the way, and we always like to look at things in hindsight. Right? That's easy to do. But, maybe if we got really good at noticing more advanced red flags than the ones that we know now, we would be able to see things, we'd be able to see the writing on the wall much better. So there's a lot of famous red flags that we teach our children, for example, or we know in society to be careful of if a person is acting strangely with us and they have poor boundaries and things like this. They're saying things that are inappropriate, so that might be more obvious, right? Then we're going to know to be careful from those people. But maybe there's other red flags that we don't even talk about. Maybe, for example, gaiva, haughtiness, is a red flag. And I'm being completely honest with you. And maybe that's not spoken about enough. And if you're wondering, Avi, what are you talking about? You fell from the moon. Why would haughtiness be a red flag for adultery? Well, I'll tell you that I gave a shir about it Motzei Shabbos. If you look in the Orchos Tzadikim, he says, from the Gemara and Sotah Hamadav, that haughtiness leads to adultery. So go figure that out. But that could be a red flag. But maybe we're not working enough on our own humility and haughtiness. We don't talk about that enough as a value that we're not going to spot that in others. And I'm not saying that's the case here. I'm not saying definitively that's the case here, but I'm just saying maybe there's more advanced things we can learn and work on ourselves that are going to help us to protect society and protect ourselves from becoming these types of people. And then we'll also be able to notice it in others. So let's move along. Is there an overly simple solution? And I say this a lot in some of my talks. People love to give simple solutions. And somebody's going to say it's the internet's fault. And somebody's going to say it's all about yichud. And somebody's going to say, there's no simple solution to the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is here. It's here to stay until Mashiach comes. And Bechira, free will, is here. The Torah, God wrote the Torah. It says, Ubacharta b'chaim. Make a good choice. Because you can make bad choices too. There's no easy solution. And that doesn't mean that we can't think about what things to do to make our community safer. But if you see a simple solution, you know it's not true. It's only, at best, a part of the whole picture. Do we have temptation? Do we have lust for power and vice? Do we have free will? We sure do. Is it possible for us as people to become aware of our shortcomings? Can we become more able to see our weaknesses and work on them? We sure can. We're going to talk about that soon. Do we make mistakes? We sure do. What we're going to try to do is, make rules that work to protect our society and our children, that work for most people most of the time. And it's important that we have opinions, and it's important that we're going to come up with solutions, and different people in the community are going to say, we need to enact a takana like this. We need to do that. Somebody sent me an article where somebody said, Chaim Walder was giving advice, but he wasn't a licensed therapist. And if he would have been a licensed therapist, he for sure wouldn't have abused any of the children or women. And I said to myself when I saw that article, really? I didn't know that being licensed as a therapist protects you from the Yetzer Hara. And by the way, if you look at the statistics of how many therapists have abused sexually their clients, also male therapists and also female therapists, the number is very high. And I'm not going to give you the number now because I didn't see it today. I saw it about a month ago. It's between 3 to 6% in Israel. Okay? That's a lot. That's a lot. Can you imagine that? None of us are free from the Yetzer Hara. None of us are free. Let's be honest. If we can't be honest, then we can't even talk about this. We've got a Yetzer Hara. We have to be careful. We have to work on ourselves. What were our prior beliefs? Right? Trauma is always about how we had some sort of core beliefs about the world, about society, about Rabbanim, about authority figures. And all of a sudden something happens and bursts our bubble, and we're shocked, and we have no idea what to do with the information. What were our prior beliefs? That's a good question. I see a question in the chat. Do people who abuse children fall under the category of the Yetzer Hara, or are they considered sick and unwell? That's part of the question. But I think that in most cases, it's people that make very bad decisions, and this has to do with the Yetzer Hara. This is also true empirically. There are studies about this. I gave a talk on this once. If you look at scientific studies, you'll see that psychological testing was done on people that did sexual offending, and you'll see that they're considered healthy people. They were normal people. They weren't crazy. And that doesn't mean that they didn't have hard time, they didn't have a struggle. And that doesn't mean that free will is such a simple matter. If you look in YouTube and you type into YouTube, the YouTube channel that I started more recently, it's called Torah for Real People. Okay, so if you put into YouTube Torah for Real People, we have some talks there on free will. Well, what does free will mean? Maybe somebody has enough free will to ask for help and nothing more. That's also true, right? Somebody's writing in the chat about how most abusers were abused as children. So what does that say about their choice? These are very big philosophical, existential questions. The topic of free will is enormous. I wrote a 33-page paper on this topic once. It's a big, complex topic. Not easy. Not easy. But I'm just saying, to come back to the presentation for a moment, what were our prior beliefs? And how did those beliefs set us up for surprise? And maybe some of those beliefs were erroneous. And part of what we're going to do today also is to try to come to a balanced reality that offers some hard truth, some bitter medicine that we need to swallow in order to be protected in the future. That is true. Only a Kadosh Baruch Hu truly knows how culpable a person is. Absolutely. Absolutely. But that also, I think, doesn't exclude us from making certain decisions to make the world a better place if the halacha allows it. And it's not a contradiction. But I agree with you, totally. Maybe we give too much power to some people. And maybe power corrupts. And we know that for sure. We know that because that's just a famous saying. We know that from Chazal. We know that from mussar. Can some level of judgment belong to mankind and the rest belong to Hashem? Hashem wants us to make some decisions about judging other people. There are laws about this. There are exceptions to the laws of Lashon Hara. Sometimes it's constructive to speak Lashon Hara. Sometimes we need to put Pashkavilin up on the wall and talk about something that somebody did because we're afraid that he's irresponsible and he's going to hurt more people. And these are serious questions. And maybe some level of judgment belongs to us. And Hashem is expecting us to do a good job. Okay, I saw a beautiful Sefer HaChinuch recently about this. And he's talking about how some of the halachos in the Torah were designed in a way to leave some level of judgment for Hashem to deal with, and other levels for the dayan to deal with, for the people down in this world who are responsible for making those judgments. Who are our heroes? That's another question. And why do we consider them experts? And if they're an expert, does that mean that they're impervious to sin? And here's another interesting thing, and we're going to move on to the next segment of this talk in just a moment. Are people learning enough Torah about making mistakes? And this is something really important. There are people listening to this right now who've made some serious mistakes, because we all make serious mistakes. Are we talking enough about how people who make mistakes can be redeemed? That they can do tshuva? That they can stand up and admit they made a mistake and ask for help? Because if we don't, then we're making it harder for people who made mistakes to get help. Right? It's a big topic. We're not going to get into that now. Here's a slide. The Torah describes itself as being very pleasant, and all of its ways are peace. And what I'm always trying to do is I'm always trying to find the daas Torah, which helps us see how the Torah is pleasant, all of its ways are peaceful. Maybe part of peace is to deal with things that have to be dealt with in an unpleasant way in order to establish peace. By the way, I think it says in the Peleyoetz on Shalom, I think that's where I saw it. He says sometimes part of making peace is to make sure that there's no peace. It's to make sure that you treat each situation the right way for the tikkun olam, to make the world operate the best way for most people. Okay, so here we go. Now, I'm going to share with you some words from a trusted gadol and leader. I'm going to ask you to lend your trust to me, and you don't have to. This is a request. I spoke to a very prominent gadol who's highly respected, I think, by most people listening to this right now, if not everybody. Very famous, incredible person. A true leader who stands up when things need to be taken care of. And he has a very particular reason that I'm somewhat privy to about why he doesn't want to be named. And I'm going to be saying things word for word that he said, but I'm not going to be saying it in his name. And I know it's going to be frustrating. Please don't shoot the messenger, which is me. I'm trying to do a service and to be helpful. And I think that his words are wise and they stand out for themselves. And I'll tell you that being involved in Hatzalah, being involved in law enforcement, being involved in psychotherapy and different things that I've been involved in my life, sometimes you have what's called in Hebrew a tzav isur pirsum. There's a gag order. Sometimes you don't want to let people know you're involved in something because you're working on something else for the sake of the tzibur, and that can ruin your efforts. And so if you don't, if you don't mind, I'm going to be saying some very powerful statements from a real gadol in Klal Yisrael, a real gadol in the Litvish world in Klal Yisrael, that people respect, that people look up to. He has a reason why he doesn't want his name to be said. His words speak for themselves, and they are a response to some of the other responses that are out there right now. And again, I'm not saying that this opinion is the only opinion, and if you would like to follow a different one, that's between you and God. But we're going to be saying an opinion that I think is very balanced and addresses a lot of the questions we just asked. And so the first thing this gadol said to me was, because I told him we're giving this talk, and I asked him many questions. He said, our response to this story needs to be constructive, and it needs to encourage women and children to talk as a result. And if we give any other sort of message that shuts victims down and doesn't allow them to open up their mouth and get help and to step forward, then we're doing a great disservice. It's a very serious thing. So again, these are his words. Our response needs to be constructive, encouraging women and children to talk as a result. And we're going to see exactly what that means soon. The gadol then went to say, based upon the available evidence that's known to him and to many people at this point, it's clear that the deceased was guilty. And then he said, the moment a man is dead, we do not need to spend time judging him because God will do this for us. We are now exempt from doing this work. And, there is a place for us to judge certain people in order to know, is he safe? Should we let him into our homes? How should we view him? And there's going to be consequential results of how do we view leaders and how do we view authority figures and all sorts of questions based on how we make these decisions. But this gadol said, it's clear this person in question, Chaim Walder, was guilty based on the available evidence. And I'm not giving you an opinion that I feel. I'm giving you something that I'm saying verbatim, word for word, from a big, prominent, respected gadol in Klal Yisrael that people really, really look up to. And he said we don't need to be involved right now in judging him because God will take care of that for us. We're exempt from doing it. And we can also rest the night knowing that this gadol holds that he was guilty. He was truly guilty. So let's move on now. What about the books? I see what about the books in the chat. I spoke to this same gadol a month ago about the books. And the gadol said that at the time, people were acting prematurely a few weeks ago, and they were burning the books and throwing the books out. And he said that was unnecessary because there was a trial, and there was not enough evidence at that time to incriminate Chaim Walder, and that was immature. It was not right to act in a knee-jerk reaction and burn the books. He said, take the books. This was then, yeah? Take the books. He said, put them in your cupboard with your Pesach dishes, and let's see what happens in the end. And if in the end we find out that he's guilty, we should get rid of these books. That's what he said a month ago, and this gadol now holds that this person is guilty. Chaim Walder is guilty, so that would mean that this gadol holds that we should get rid of his books. So that's the answer to that question. So let's move on to point number 3. We need to now put our entire focus on helping victims and on helping our children who are broken and traumatized from the story and with restoring trust in humanity, right? Because we said, God is busy judging Chaim Walder. He's up with him now. And we already know he's guilty because the Rav holds based on the evidence available he's guilty. And our job is to focus our time, our articles, our opinions, whatever energy that you were going to put into this, into helping the children and the women to step forth who were broken and who were hurt, and to take care of that and to help restore trust in humanity. Why is there no gadol speaking out? I see that question in the chat. I have some theories about this. I have some theories as to why some gadolim are not putting their names on certain things. And this is a big topic that I don't claim to understand well. But like I said, sometimes it's because they have a very particular reason why it's important for them to stay out of it, because they're working on something else that can blow what they're doing. And I happen to have firsthand information in this case that that's the case. There's other stories that the public doesn't know about and other consequences of this story that some people are dealing with involved with other people. And it's complicated. But I'm just going to say a word or two on leadership, and then I want to come back to the point at hand. Leadership means that people stand up and they show the tzibur what they need to hear, and it's not an easy thing to do. I'm not going to judge any gadol for what he does or doesn't do because I have emunas chachamim. I'm not going to judge them, but I am going to say, and you might not like this point, I am going to say that I think it would make it easier for gedolim to be good leaders if we would be good followers. And I'm not saying that that's the answer to this good question in the chat, but I think it's part of the question too. Anyways, let's stick for the moment back to the point here in the matzeget, in the PowerPoint. Okay. Number 4, this story runs very deep and it disrupts people's faith in authority figures because the deceased was part of the heart and soul of mainstream Haredi Judaism. Right? This is the words of the Gadol that we're quoting today. And when leaders in the community respond to this story by placing blame on the community for his death, it only makes this worse. The community is not to blame. So again, the Gadol here is clearly saying the tzibur is not to blame for Chaim Walder's death. Chaim Walder chose to kill himself. And in fact, he was using this as a strategy to try to shut down some of the victims from speaking out. And this was a tactic of his. And we don't have to feel bad about this, and we don't have to make the victims who spoke out feel guilty that they took his life. He took his life, they didn't take his life. And we want to have a message that, like we said before from this gadol, encourages victims to step forth, victims of Chaim Walder or victims of other people as well. And, we want to be able to enable anybody that has something important to say and to reach help to get that help. So number 5 is a very interesting point. Unlike other sins, or even other sexual sins, Eishes Ish, says the Gadol, or adultery, is an unforgivable crime. And the deceased was a terrible person for doing it. I was very surprised by this point, not because I think it's not bad, but I was not expecting the Gadol to say this. But he said that unlike all other sexual sins, right, there's many ways to sin sexually, but he said Eishes Ish is unforgivable. He said, why? Because for a person's own lust, they will lure a woman and pretend that they love her just to use her for their own desires, and by doing so, destroy a life and families. And this is the words of the Gadol. And so that's very interesting. That's the daas Torah on this one. There's an unforgivable crime, and this was the crime, and this was the man, and this is something we can't forgive him for. Such a level of evil is unforgivable. Okay, so again, this is not my opinion, but this is the opinion of the Gadol that I'm quoting today. And then the Gadol proceeded to say something very interesting. He said that Chaim Walder lacked courage, and what he should have done is to stand up and say, and I quote, and everything that I'm saying are the words of this Gadol. He should stand up and say, my ultimate act of chinuch is I failed, and I want to do tshuva. I failed, I'm leaving the stage, and I need to go deal with my personal issues. Okay? This is what he should have done and didn't do. And he tried to use the threat of suicide to quiet his victims, including one married woman who is currently in the process of getting divorced as a result of the story with Chaim Walder. And again, the Gadol reiterated, I do not think the community did anything wrong. Right? We're not leaving anybody out. I see in the chat. We're not trying to leave anybody out here. I'm just quoting some of the words of the Gadol that I spoke to today. So 8. Some Haredi outlets simply published that Chaim Walder died without any explanation or background, and said the Gadol, that is so stupid. We're going to get to Rav Gershon's point in a moment, but it's an important point. We'll get to it in a moment. So again, what about the fact that some Haredi news outlets published that Chaim Walder died? Right today, I saw in one of the newspapers it said Chaim Walder, Zichrono Levracha, had a little hesed on him, didn't say what happened, didn't say how, why, background. So said the Gadol, that is so stupid. Those are his words. And to continue the words of the Gadol, he said, this segment of the Haredi world has a virtual reality. All of our kids know what happened, that he killed himself. There's no secrets today. So what's the point of playing make-believe? It's stupid, it's silly, and it's ridiculous. Okay? So again, please don't be upset with Avi Tenenbaum for quoting this. Just like in halacha you have different opinions, and in hashkafa you have different opinions, I'm quoting to you today the opinion of a real gadol b'Yisrael. Okay? And this was his opinion. And in regards to Rav Gershon Edelstein, he has a different opinion about this. And you're welcome to follow that opinion. But I'm going to be quoting this opinion of this gadol today. 9. What do we want to achieve? That victims should not come forth and talk? That predators should not be dealt with? What does a response that buries what happened achieve? Okay, and that was the response of this gadol to that approach. 10. I think it's been a while since people blindly trusted anything that Rabbanim say. We are far past that point. I know it sounds bad, but I think people need to know to be choosy in choosing Rabbanim and Gedolim. What can I say? This is a very interesting point. The gadol here was referring to the fact that us as adults, who do we choose to get advice from and perspectives from, and who do we hand our trust over to? And we shouldn't do that so lightly. And we shouldn't just cheapen our trust. We should be very careful who we trust. We should know why we trust that person. And we should be able to qualify and understand what we trust them about. And maybe they're good for one thing and not for something else. But said the gadol, we need to be choosy in choosing Rabbanim and Gedolim. We have to use critical thinking. If you look in the internet today, there's a lot of these articles. How do you know if a therapist is good? 25 signs that a therapist is bad. Right? This type of stuff. There are bad people in the world. There are mediocre people in the world. There are people who are experts in one thing, but not maybe an expert in something else. Maybe they admit that, maybe they don't. We need to be choosy in who our authority figures are. 11. The public needs to hear, right? Because I asked the gadol. I said, the public needs to hear the lesson that we are human. We're human beings. And to have thought for any moment that any authority figure or Rav is impervious to sin is a mistake. We can all make mistakes. And if we're making mistakes, we better fix that and get help. But we're human beings. All of us are human beings. Rabbis are human beings. Gedolim are human beings. I would give a lot of commentary on this, but I'm trying to stick right now just to the words of the gadol. That's the second thing the gadol said we need to talk about. We have tremendous inclination for sexual temptation. And that's no secret. And I have a lot of shiurim on this on YouTube, on the Torah for Real People channel. And we talk about this a lot. The Zohar says that the main temptation for people is sexual temptation. Let's be honest about this. The Shulchan Aruch says you need to be misrachak min ha'arayos ma'oid ma'oid. Double ma'oid. Right? So, we're human. We've got sexual temptation. And the third thing the gadol said we need to talk about is we need to encourage anybody that was hurt to speak up and not to frighten them that if anything happens to Chaim Walder or another perpetrator that it's their fault. It's not their fault. And we want to give them the room and the ability without any obstacles to come forth and to talk about what they need to and to get help. How can you access the recording once it's ready? You can send me an email on Thursday to avitenenbaumpfa@gmail.com, and I hope that it will be ready by then, and you'll get the link to download it that way. Okay, so I'm gonna now take over. So those were the words of the gadol, and now that we spoke theoretically and we said some sharp words from one of the gedolim, I'm going to make some comments. I'm in a lot of groups. I am affiliated with a lot of different organizations and professionals and all sorts of people. And I felt that there was a big elephant in the room that people were ignoring. And I feel that we have to address the following point. How could a person like you and me wind up doing things like this for 20 years? And what I mean is, if we simply take perpetrators and we turn them into monsters without trying to understand, how did they get to that point? How can a person make such bad decisions in so many times? How does that happen? If we don't try to understand how that happened, then we're failing to understand our weaknesses. And if we fail to understand our weaknesses, then how could we possibly protect our children and our communities? How could we be the best people that we could be? And how could we notice the red flags when we see them if we're lacking ourselves in some of these areas? just writing down the email so people can jot that down. If you look in the chat, avitenenbaum@pfa@gmail.com. Okay? I feel we really need to understand how a person can make such mistakes. How does that happen? And I have a lot of classes about this, and this is something that I encourage us to think about. Can you do something like that? Can I do something like that? Is it possible for us to steal? Is it possible for us to do adultery? Is it possible for us to deny God? And all sorts of things. Is that possible? I think it's possible. I think if we don't believe it's possible, we're not even going to begin to notice our weaknesses. And then we're not going to be able to work on ourselves. Is it possible that people use rationalizations to trick themselves into thinking certain things are true? That's absolutely possible. And I can tell you, I've been working with people with addiction for over a decade. Oh my gosh, the types of fascinating rationalizations that they use. The Sefer Tanya learns, the Chazal say, Ein Adam chayte ela im kein nichnas by ruach shtos. A person only sins if a spirit of foolishness enters into him. And the Tanya learns that Gemara to mean we make rationalizations. What's a rationalization? There are many ways to translate it, but we like to tell ourselves a smidgen of truth that sounds true enough that we're like, oh, that makes sense, so this allows me to do what I want to do. We make rationalizations. We can lie to ourselves. We can trick ourselves. We can think everything is great and dandy about us and that we're great people, and we can be lying straight to our face. I see in the chat box somebody saying, oh, it went up. How can victims feel safe speaking up with this kind of denial? Well, I think we have to make them feel safe. That's on us, each person, in our sphere of influence, with our koach and our hashpah and the people around us. We have to make people feel safe enough that they could talk about this. We'll get to the email address in the end, shortly. Okay, next point. We want to finish here. We're going to finish soon. There's something called cognitive dissonance, and there's something called guilt. There are certain painful feelings that a person has when they believe that they should act a certain way, but then they act in a different way. And that makes us feel stupid. That makes us feel bad. That makes us feel guilty. And the mussar frum tell us guilt is a gift. Guilt is a gift. And it's meant there to warn us and say, hello, wake up there. You're doing bad stuff. You better fix yourself. You better go for help. You better go to a rav. You better go to a therapist. You better learn mussar. You better be more honest. Right? That's what guilt is for. And what happens if I believe to be one way, but I keep giving into temptation and doing something else? You know what happens is I make a gap in between who I believe I should be and who I act to be. And when that happens and I have that gap, it's very disconcerting and powerful. And we can go two ways to deal with that problem. We can admit that we made a mistake, and we can look for a way to do tshuva and find a understanding therapist or rav or whatever it takes to dig ourselves out of the problem we put ourselves in. Or we can just make another lie to deal with that pain and just keep lying to ourselves and lying until we start to believe our lies. And then the gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it gets to be this enormous cobweb of lies that you just can't untangle anymore. And that's that person's fault. And they brought themselves to be in that place. And that's possible. And we have that capacity. And we have to be careful. Yes, I have that capacity. You have that capacity. We have that capacity. And there's some other points I want to say too that I feel were not spoken about enough. And they're just points for thinking. Who are our heroes? If you look in America in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, interesting trial that happened recently in America. And if you were following that, some people viewed him as a bad guy. Some people viewed him as a good guy. Some people wanted to give him the Congressional Medal of Honor. And some people said, who are your heroes exactly? What are your criteria for a hero? So that's my question too. Who is our criteria as a person that we let into our lives, that we take advice from? What type of rabbanim? What type of gedolim? What type of experts? And I think it should have something to do with being dead honest and admitting our faults and being very vigilant about our Yetzer Hara. I think it has a lot to do with that, at least amongst other things. It's not only about expertise. Maybe there's other things that we need to see too in our heroes in order to lend our trust to them. And the fact that somebody's a good author, does that mean that they're impervious to sin? And people today are following sports players. They're getting their political advice or life advice from sports players and actors. Are those people the types of people that have expertise on how to live? The Mesilas Yesharim says in the introduction, he says in the beginning of Mesilas Yesharim that, who you should get advice from about the Yetzer Hara is somebody who made his way to the middle of the maze. He fought his Yetzer Hara. He fell and he kept getting up and he kept working things out. He was honest and he made his way to the middle of that maze. That's a guy that's worth taking advice from. That's a person that fell, he got scratched up, he got banged up, he admits reality, and he's able to guide you through that reality and help you get to where he got to. Right? We have some shiurim about this as well on the TFRP channel. You can check that out. We have a whole beautiful mashal from the Baal Shem Tov about this idea. Sometimes a great person is a person who makes mistakes, but he knows that he makes a mistake, and he learns from that mistake, and he's able to share that with other people. None of us are impervious to the Yetzer Hara. None of us. And think about this. What is it like to be a public figure? And can a famous person afford to get help? And I'll tell you that I was approached by a number of rabbanim and therapists over the years, and they said, Avi, could you help us arrange a group therapy, a clinic, some sort of way for us to get help? Because what happens if a Rav has an addiction? Or what happens if a therapist has a depression? And they have a reason now not to be discovered. They don't want people to know that they're struggling because their expertise seemingly means that they shouldn't be depressed or they shouldn't be having an addiction, right? That's their whole product. That's what they sell. They sell expertise. They sell spirituality. They sell expertise in dealing with the Yetzer Hara. So how can a rabbi now come and say, hey, I'm looking at pornography. Can you help me? And I've had some very brave rabbanim that came to me for that problem. And I've had some very brave therapists that said, hey, I'm dealing with OCD. Can you help me? What? A therapist with OCD? Yeah, of course. What, they're impervious to having those problems? No. We're human beings. We can have problems. We should be able to ask for help and reach out for help. And we should have some address that somebody's able to let us get that help. What if your job is to pretend all the time? Can you imagine a famous personality, Avram Fried? I don't know if Avram Fried is listening to this talk or if he's ever going to hear it. But you know how many friends I have that took selfies with Avram Fried? And he's always smiling. And I'm sure he's a wonderful person, and I'm sure he's a very happy person and a special person. I don't know him. But maybe part of his job is he's always got to smile for pictures. Well, what if he doesn't want to smile? That's a hard position to be in. And then if your job requires you to be a faker, or a little bit of a faker, then how genuine can you be and how in touch can you be with your feelings? And that's a hard position to be in. How can we trust again? We're going to get to that. You know what? Let's just get to that right now. How can we trust again? Look, I want to tell you something. The world is a beautiful place. And most people, most of the time, make good decisions. And they do the right thing. And I think these are rare events. I can't give you exact figures. I'm not looking to give exact figures. But I think that most people, most of the time, are good people. They're people we can trust. And if you're not sure if you can trust somebody, do what Chazal say, kabdehu v'chashdehu. Respect them, but be suspicious of them. And maybe part of being suspicious in a healthy way is do a background check, get some references on the person, find out who this person is, find out his opinions. Today with the internet, by the way, it's very easy to learn about people because they spoke in different venues and they have different recordings. Find out who the person is. And there's another part of how can we trust again also. I think that this is a point that's very not spoken, and feel free to say this to other people. I think this is so important. I think the more that we work on ourselves and the more that we are aware of our struggles and our weaknesses and our shortcomings, and we learn Sifrei Mussar. I know that sounds geeky to say in 2021 for a mental health professional figure to say learn Mussar. I know that sounds pathetic, but I'm going to say it. Mussar is all about character traits and our biases and our failings and what we're capable of doing and how we can really, really mess up and what to do in that situation and how to overcome bias. What are the tricks of the Yetzer Hara? And how does he trick us? How does he dupe us every time? And what can we do about that? If we don't learn that for ourselves and become experts in that, then how are we going to know how to see great people who are greater than us? we don't even have the tools. It's like if you're a plumber and you need an expert, really big plumber to consult with. So then you probably know how to consult with a big expert because you're a plumber yourself. So you've got that knowledge now to go pick somebody even bigger than you. But if you know nothing, then everyone's the same. Everything's the same. You have no way to discriminate who to trust and who not to trust. So I say, let's work on ourselves. Let's make ourselves the greatest people that we can be. I'm telling you, this is such an important point. And that's going to help you make your community safer so that you don't hurt other people. And so that you can also tell who to trust. I really think that's an important point. I see in the chat now, I know there was a lot of points. I can't get to all of them. They're also important, every one of them. But there's a lot of stuff about tznius and the halachos of, gidrei arayos, and how we make sure to not fall prey to sexual sin. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was in the Haredi branch of University of Haifa, there was a professor there who was single, who was a so-called expert on marriage. And he wanted us all to write a paper summing up different topics in psychology about marriage. And then we were supposed to go and offer our opinion about, what can the field learn and continue in their investigation, in their research. And so I was given the task in university of investigating how do affairs happen at work. And that was a really interesting question. So I decided to investigate that. And I looked on Google Scholar and I looked at all the different studies about that. How often does it happen that people have affairs at work? In the professional world, in the secular world, what are the factors that they think lead to that? What is the age or the profile of people that usually do this? And it was a very fascinating homework assignment that I had to do for college, and I learned a lot from it. And so when I got to the point of now you have to add your opinion, what can the field learn? What can we do instead to improve this problem? So I literally, you're going to laugh at this, but I wrote down all these different suggestions from Chazal. I wrote about yichud, and I wrote about not flirting with a person who's not your wife, and all sorts of different things. And I gave this in to the professor, and he looked at this paper and he said, wow, this is ingenious. Where did you get these suggestions from? And I said, I got them from the Shulchan Aruch. We've got something called Even HaEzer. It has many simanim in it. It has all these suggestions to help us to be safe from falling to temptation. And he thought this was brilliant. So just a funny story. Okay, so that's my call to action for tonight. It's so easy for us to try to fix the whole world and come out with sweeping solutions and to blame and to call everybody out for not being good enough and maybe there's a lot of things that we have to do. There's a lot of takanas that maybe we can make. Maybe you have an important idea, run it by your community leaders, try to get it done. The Mishnah says, Ein alecha hamalacha ligmor, v'iyata ben chayrin libatel mimena, right? We can't sit idle. Nobody asked me to give this talk. I felt this was important. I stood up and gave the talk. You can't sit idle, but that doesn't mean you can fix all the world's problems either. We're so limited, but that also doesn't mean you shouldn't try. But I think that one of the most direct, easy, important, real ways that we can make the world a better place and really, really make the community better is to work on ourselves and to be dead honest. I really mean that. And that's my call to action. That's my call to action. Let's learn about ourselves and what we're capable of. And let's make a society of self-improvement. And let's make a culture where we can notice that we have, nitios, inclinations to doing all sorts of silly, crazy things, and to learn how to overcome those. And if we did them already, what do we do about that? And how to make good choices. Walder says that free will is a skill. It's a hard skill to learn. How do you learn free will? How do you learn to overcome temptation and not just to indulge in everything that you want every moment? And how to not just follow your feelings or not follow your impulses. These are the hardest things. The Mesilas Yesharim says in the very beginning that Yiras Hashem, in other words, what we're talking about now, is the greatest. It's the greatest wisdom that there is. It's the most complex wisdom, more than any other wisdom. And it's really hard. Let's learn this stuff. Let's understand who we are. There's an old story from the Chaim, and they also say this story about different Buddhist monks. I've heard it from Tainit Han and other people, if you follow those types of people. And it's the funniest. It's Everyone knows this quote, but it says, first I thought I can change the whole world, then I thought I can change my city, then I can change my neighborhood, and in the end, I just worked on myself to change myself, and in the end, that actually had an impact on changing the world. So let's change ourselves. Let's change ourselves. Let's work on ourselves. Okay, I'm done for tonight. I'm not done. Sorry, I'm almost done. I'm going to talk about one more thing. I want you to know that there's a ton of Torah sources on Rabbanim and what Rabbanim are capable of and not. How to speak to children about this. We'll get to that in a moment if we remember. I see a lot of important questions in the chat. I'm just going to try to focus for a second. I collect sources about all sorts of Torah stuff. I remember as a yeshiva student, I had a lot of questions, philosophical, hashkafa questions, and I would ask some of my rabbeim, and they would say something like this. They would say, nobody talks about this issue, so it must not be true. We have a rule in the Torah, lo ra'inu eino raya. If you didn't see something happen, that doesn't prove that it doesn't exist, right? And my father, who should be blessed, he has one of the biggest frum collections in the world. That's a true fact. He has one of the biggest frum collections in the world. And so anytime I had a question about life, some Torah question, and I would ask a Rebbe, and the Rebbe would say, oh, nobody talks about this, so it must not be true. When they would say something like that, I would get real frustrated. And I would call up my father, and I would say, Dad, where does it talk about X, Y, Z? And he would be like, where does it talk about X, Y, Z? It talks about it here, it talks about it there, it talks about it there. And he would quote books that you never heard of in your life, that nobody owns, nobody reads, but they exist. And Shlomo HaMelech says, the world repeats itself over and over. These are old issues. The Yetzer Hara is an old issue. Sex is an old issue. Hurting other people at your expense, it's an old issue. People covering stuff under the rug, that's an old issue. These are old issues. They're going to be around till Mashiach comes. And so there's a lot of Torah sources about Rabbanim who are bad people. If you look in the Sefer Yosher Divrei Emes in the beginning, he talks about Rabbanim there that do adultery. Okay? There's a story in the Sefer Megid Givus Olam with a rabbi that was caught doing adultery. And they asked the Gadol in that generation in post-war Europe in New York, how could it be that this big rabbi did adultery? And the Gadol in that story, one of the Rosh Hashivas, I think of Beis Talmud, I don't remember the name right now, because I just didn't have time to prepare this as much as I wanted to. But he said the Torah is not an oven. That was his, that's what he said. The Torah is not an oven. The fact that you read lots of Torah and you're an expert in teaching Gemara, you know a lot of halachos, that doesn't make you impervious to the Yetzer Hara. You know what makes you impervious to the Yetzer Hara? Knowing you have a Yetzer Hara and working on your Yetzer Hara. That's the only thing. There's no tricks here. There's no shortcut. There's no shortcut. And, so here's just some examples of sources, other sources about Rabbanim in the generation before Mashiach. We've got all sorts of authority figures that the Baal Shem Tov here says in this quote and in this quote. There's going to be all sorts of fakers, and there's going to be all sorts of people that are subpar leaders, and they're going to be saying false ideas, and they're going to be saying everything's backwards. Good question in the chat. Aren't we supposed to see our Rav as an angel? Yes. Yes, there's an idea like that, but we have to find out who is the angel, who is the Rav that we look up to. And that's what the Gadol said today. We have to be very choosy with who we pick to lend our trust to. Who is that Gadol? Who is he? Who is he? I think he exists. I have some people like this for myself. I'm not going to list names because this is not a name thing. This is not about, oh, Avi connects to these people, so you should too. You might have to pray to God and ask to find your own leader. But at least in the writings of the Baal Shem Tov and other Sfarim we see, there's some bad people out there, even people that know lots of Torah. Here's a quote from Rabbi Nachman about, he calls them Shedim Yehudayim, and that's a quote from the Zohar, if I'm not mistaken, Jewish demons. And it says that, that there's Rabbanim that are bad people. It says here in a quote from the Gra, if you look in Yud Ches over here, there's Rabbanim that their whole thing of teaching Torah is just to get a lot of honor, just to make some money. There's people like that. That exists. Okay, so there's sources on this. This is by no means some sort of exhaustive list of sources. When you pick somebody to trust, see, is he the type of person that shares the values of who you want to be? I remember a Rav when I was younger who abused his wife. He would abuse his wife. He would beat up his wife. Yes, I know a real Rav that would beat up his wife. and he was a teacher of mine, and I couldn't learn from him, and I was privy to this information. That exists. That happens. Okay? So if I see something funny that I don't understand, well, why is my teacher doing that? Is that somebody I can learn Torah from? If I learn Torah from a Rebbe that is a potty mouth and says bad words all day and defames everybody and has terrible midos, is that a person I should learn Torah from? Are those the character traits? Is that the type of person I want to choose? Okay? I'm not addressing Chaim Walder at this moment. Somebody just asked in general, what are pointers to finding a Rav? Did he have good values? I'll be honest. I never read a single one of Chaim Walder's books. He wasn't part of my childhood. I never met the man. I don't think I was even in the same room as him one time. I live in Israel more than half my life. My family is Israeli. I speak Hebrew at home. I don't know anything about it. So again, I can't talk about the man too much because I don't even know the man. But how can somebody tell if a rabbi is hiding the bad things that he does? Again, there are red flags, just like there are red flags with abusers. There are red flags with the way the people that we're looking up to are acting. You know, there are people today believing in Rabbanim that murdered people or told people to murder people, that run cults and that did adultery. And when you ask them about it, they say, oh, he's above halacha, he's God, or, we're not allowed to ask questions about him and all sorts of things like this. Is that really true? You know, there's a famous quote, they say about what's the quote? The quote is, they don't see those types of things about you and me, right? They don't say those things about you and me. We should try to be the type of people that we're easy enough to understand. People understand what we're doing. We're transparent. We're genuine. We're keeping the halacha. We're keeping the Shulchan Aruch. We're behaving. We're good to mankind and we're good to Hashem, right? It says in the Mishnah Navos, Ezo hi derech yisharach sheyavar lai ha'adam kol shehi teferes, I'm forgetting the words, the Chaim v'teferes no seha, right? The Mishnah says in Avos, what's the right way to live? A person that is good to God and good to other people. Okay, we've been hammering on this point a lot. Let's see. Okay, Rav Shammai Grove says it's okay to continue reading his books. Okay, look, these are all different opinions. Perfect, no problem. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that. There's a lot of opinions on this. I'm not trying to give one opinion and to exclude the rest. How do we talk to our children about this? I'm going to talk about this for a minute and then take some more questions, then we're going to finish because it's really late. I honestly, I didn't put my head into this a lot in this round of perpetrator question, what do you tell kids? But I think it's important for kids to be encouraged to ask questions. It's important for kids to be able to share their feelings. It's important for us to validate their feelings about this story. It's important for us to let them know that some people have a Yetzer Hara. We all have a Yetzer Hara. They should know we all have a Yetzer Hara, and some people make bad decisions. The Torah says you should make good decisions. Some people make bad decisions. Look in the story of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. The Yachanu Boaz on that Mishnah I think it's in Paragimel, says that that's the Yochanan from the Hanukkah story, and the guy became a tziduki after 80 years. How does that happen? People make bad decisions. Things happen. Life is dynamic. Reb Nachman says, life is a narrow bridge. Kol ha'olam kulai gesher tzar ma'od. The Mesilas Yesharim says we're all living in a battle, and the battle is panim v'achar. The battle of the Yetzer Hara is in front of us, it's on the sides, it's behind us. Living life as a human being is not simple. That's our greatness. Our greatness is that it's so not simple. It's an uphill battle. We have a TFRP about this too. If you go in YouTube to the TFRP channel again, and I'm going to show you the links in my email shortly. No, I'll just do it now. But it's not simple to be a human being. It's not simple to make good decisions. This is an uphill battle, and God made it that way. I have some classes on this. You could check this out if you look at these links here. And here's my email also, by the way, to get the recording on Thursday morning. But we should let kids know some people hurt other people, and they make bad decisions, and we have to be careful. And if anything is funny to us and it doesn't seem right, I want you to be able to feel comfortable that you can talk to Abba and Ima about it. You can ask us questions, and if you're not sure if you want to trust somebody, we can decide that together. Okay, those are 2 words on what to tell children, but there's a lot of material on this. A lot of experts on this. So I'm not going to try to replace them. That was just 2 words on this. Any other questions? Any questions before we finish? Thank you, by the way, everybody, for joining and for being such a good audience. Any other questions? What is my email? So if you look on the screen, it says avitenenbaumpfa@gmail.com. Are we allowed to know what the evidence is? Well, again, I am not an investigator. I didn't investigate this, and I didn't sit in the Beis Din, but I did understand from this gadol, and this is public information. This is not some inside secret, that there was a recording, which was unedited, of Chaim Walder begging a married woman who he was with to please be quiet and to not share the things that they did together, or else he's going to take his life. Okay, and that's the information that I know, but I'm not trying to be any sort of expert on the information. If you want this technical information, you can go find it out on your own. I'm not going to come say it is edited, isn't edited, but I heard from this gadol that experts said that this was not edited and this was genuine. So that's all I know. Any other questions about any of the topics that we spoke about today? Is continuing reading his books a problem for children's chinuch? Look, that's a question. Some Rabbanim are saying that you shouldn't read his books because we need to send a strong message that we don't tolerate this as a community. And it's not necessarily that the words changed because of what he did, but it's because we need to take a stance. And we can't have books written by a person like this in our community. We have to show very strongly that this is intolerable. That's one position that a lot of Rabbanim have. Another position is they say, no, the words themselves are not pure. The words themselves have imbued in them messages that are not correct. And I heard this as well. In fact, I know a Rav that was trying to stop him from publishing his books over 20 years ago for all sorts of errors and subtle things of hashkafa in his books that he felt was not Torah. But I never read his book, so you can't ask me which books and which issues. I can't tell you that. How do I regain trust in humanity? Okay, that's a question people are asking over and over. We said that most people most of the time are trustworthy. Most people most of the time are good. The world is a good place. And most people don't die in car accidents. Their planes don't go down when they're flying to a chasana. They don't suddenly have a heart attack every single morning when they wake up. The world is a lovely place, and it's a beautiful place, and most people are good, and we have a Yetzer Tov too, not only a Yetzer Hara, and we make good choices. There's a lot of great people. And the fact that you all came here to learn about this, that we're talking about this, shows something special about you. So we are good. Most of us are trying to be good at the very least. We're trying to do the right thing. And I think you could trust humanity. And I think, again, we need to put the people we can't trust into perspective. It's a very small part of humanity. You know, as a Hatzalah medic, if you ever did a CPR on a child, or you ever went to a fatal car accident and you saw some of the worst things that you don't wish on anybody to ever see, and then you come home and you can't sleep and you can't sit with yourself, what do? And one of the things that always helped me was I would come home and I would see my kids playing with Lego. I would see my wife sitting in the kitchen cooking supper. And that reminded me that there's mundane, beautiful, nice parts of this world. And the world is running in a nice way. And there's good people, and there's good things. And that's something we need to remind ourselves after a trauma event happens. And if you think in your life of the people who you trusted until now, and they stood with that trust with you your whole life, and they kept your secrets, and they treated you fairly, and they love you, you'll see that most people that you trusted, it worked out fairly well. So the world is really a good place. And if that's hard for you, I'll give you a little exercise that I've given some people before. Tomorrow or tonight, wherever you are in the world, try to just notice the mundane things outside. Just see the sun outside and see people just shopping and buying groceries and see that really most things are okay most of the time. It's so important to remember this and to remind ourselves of this over and over. And of course, again, we also said that it is worthwhile learning what are red flags and boundaries and to understand how to trust people and how to discern evil people from good people, because there are evil people in the world. If we deny that, we're for sure not going to be safe. What about what Rav Edelstein said? Somebody's asking me. Well, what Rav Edelstein said, he's a gadol, he's entitled to his opinion. I'm not going to tell him what to do. And that is his opinion. I did not want to bring his opinion in this talk because I felt just that most of the people listening to this talk would appreciate the opinion of the gadol that he brought. But if you believe in that opinion and you want to follow it, that's your choice, because we do have free will. And again, elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. I don't want anybody walking away and saying that Avi Tenenbaum said not to listen to Rav Edelstein, or he's good or he's bad. I didn't say either of those, but I did try to bring a balanced opinion from a gadol that I thought you can appreciate. That's a good question. Wow. That's such a big question about chinuch, about teaching these different topics. That's a big question. I'm not going to answer that now. That's a very big question. How could we teach these topics? There are a lot of great Jewish organizations in the United States and in Israel, and I'm sure in other countries of people participating as well, that they are experts in knowing how to protect the community from sexual abuse. And I would encourage that you consult with those experts and ask how they can do their programs together with Rabbanim in the Chadarim and in the Beis Yaakovs and in the schools to make the community safer in the way that those Rabbanim and those experts see fit. Do you think, once this new question, do you think it was correct to talk about it publicly? So here's the thing. Do I think it was correct to talk about it publicly when the accusations first came out? I had a very interesting conversation with this gadol then as well. And he said the following. You know, the Iton Haaretz, if you know what that is, the Haaretz newspaper here in Israel, they were the ones that really got the ball rolling on the story by talking about this story and the accusations and all sorts of things. And when they published that story, a lot of people said, don't believe it, and this is from an irreligious newspaper that's far left, and they don't like us, and they're trying to destroy our achtas and all sorts of things. And I'm not saying that that was right or wrong. And some people said, look in the Sefer Chavetz Chaim, you have to be careful from Yetzer Hara. And then other people said, if you look in the Sefer Chavetz Chaim, he has all sorts of qualifications of when you should talk Yetzer Hara, when you shouldn't talk Yetzer Hara. And he actually has a whole section about somebody who people say bad things about him, and there's a call, there's a rumor going around that this person did bad things. So maybe it's a mitzvah to talk about it. And this was the discussion. And so I went to the gadol and I said, what's your opinion on this? Should the Iton Haaretz have published this or not? And he surprised me with his answer then as well. And he said, if the journalist looked into this topic and found these victims, and he believed, to the best of his knowledge, that they had something important to share, then it was right for him to share this with the public. If he felt that this was the way to make society better, and again, the police apparently already investigated this, and then they closed the investigation because there wasn't enough evidence, and then this person went and investigated things. If that's all true, if, I'm just saying the word if so you hear that I said if that's all true, and the person investigated this and found this to be credible to the best of his knowledge, then it was right that they spoke about this. Because if we don't allow ourselves to speak about this, said the gadol, then nothing's ever going to get off the ground. We're never going to get anywhere. אני רואה את השאלה בצ'אט בעברית, זו שאלה די חשובה, קשה לי לענות על זה עכשיו, בפרט שפה בארץ ישראל החדרים הולכים לכאורה עם הדת תורה של רב אדלשטיין. אז יש גם קטע תרבותית כאן, וצריכים להתאים את העצה יחד עם גדולי ישראל שהם מתנהלים על פיהם, ולכן אני לא רוצה לדבר על זה עכשיו, אבל אני מקווה שכל מנהל בית ספר יתייעץ עם אנשי מקצוע חרדים, לדעת איך לעשות את זה, רבנים ואנשי מקצוע חרדים ביחד, לדעת איך להעביר את הדברים כמו שצריך. Any other questions? You can see what Rav Edelstein said in the news. They talk about it in the news. Oh, a bunch of questions just jumped here. I think I missed some questions. Why don't schools teach girls and kids to watch out like they invest in crossing the road safely? Those are really age-old questions. They really are. And again, there are some wonderful Jewish organizations in the world that deal with those questions, and they try to make that better in schools. So I would recommend maybe you can volunteer for those organizations. You can donate to those organizations. There are different books. I know that somebody contacted me earlier today and said that there is a book about safety from sexual abusers that they wanted to buy thousands of copies and give them out. And if this is something that you think can help your community, go for it. So somebody's asking, isn't it possible that he had a split personality? I'm going to work backwards. I was not his best friend, not his family member, not his therapist, not his brother. I don't know Chaim Walder, and I'm never going to know him because he's not alive anymore. But I'm working backwards. The Gadol told us that Chaim Walder made bad decisions and did unforgivable things. And that means that he had free will and he made bad decisions. That's what this Gadol said. That's not Abi Tenenbaum. That's the Gadol that I'm quoting. And is it possible that he had a split personality? Well, I can tell you one thing from working with people who have sex addiction and things like this for over a decade. You can make yourself have what you might call split personality. That's what we spoke about earlier in the talk about cognitive dissonance. You can believe certain things, but then act differently and lead a double life. And you can tell yourself lies and believe those lies over and over, and you can be offered avenues of help, and you can be stubborn and not refuse them and take the whole ship down with you. And that's a real chaval. And if you look in the statements that Rav Shmuel Eliyahu made, we didn't really speak about him today, but if you want to, you can check out his statements as well. Very interesting statements. He made a number of statements yesterday and today and last month, televised. And he said yesterday very clearly that Chaim Walder, in his opinion, he was on the Beis Din checking this out, Rav Shmuel Eliyahu. He said that Chaim Walder made a decision to choose to end his life, and the Beis Din offered him a way to do tshuva, and he chose not to take it. So again, these are not things that I'm saying. I'm quoting things that I heard from other people. I think it's very important to believe that there's evil in the world. If we use too much compassion, then we're not going to be careful. We're not going to be safe. These are big topics. And again, I'm not claiming that I'm covering all the aspects of these topics now. We could talk all about suicide and compassion for people with suicide and the halachas of suicide, and it goes on and on and on. And it's going to be too long for tonight. I hope at least that I'm giving you guys some things to think about and to speak about with your own rabbanim and trusted leaders. Why did Rav Eliyahu? Okay, well, I saw a question about Rav Eliyahu, but you can ask Rav Eliyahu the questions about what he did. Any other questions? Any other questions? Any other questions? Thank you all for participating, really. Thank you for all of us together, doing this together. I was a bit apprehensive about doing this. I told you in the beginning. I was a bit apprehensive about this because I felt that no matter what I do, it's not going to satisfy everybody. But I hope that this was constructive. I hope it gave us things to think about. And again, the call to action is that we should really work on ourselves. We should study. We should notice our weaknesses and our biases. We should talk about these things. We should work on these things. If you have questions, continue with your Rav that you trust and experts that you trust. As far as the recording, again, send an email on avitenenbaumpfa@gmail.com. Send an email on Thursday morning. I hope by Thursday morning to have the recording for you, to download it, and to disseminate that. I hope this was L'tul Eves. We tried to do this to be Marbek Kvod Shomayim and to do the Ratzon Hashem. We consulted with many Rabbanim and then with this Gadol about what to say and in what approach, and this is what we came out with. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody. We should hear Besuros Taivos. Hashem should help us to overcome the Yetzer Hara and to make very, very good decisions.